Lydia Maria Child was an American abolitionist, feminist, Native American rights campaigner, novelist, journalist, and opponent of American expansionism. From the 1820s until the 1850s, her journals, both fiction and housekeeping guides, were widely read. In some of her works, she stunned her audience by addressing issues of both male dominance and white supremacy. Lydia Maria Francis was born February 11, 1802, in Medford, Massachusetts, to Susanna and Converse Francis. She went by her middle name, Mariah, and pronounced it that way. Converse Francis, her older brother, attended Harvard College and seminary before becoming a Unitarian pastor. Child was educated in a local dame school and then at a women's seminary. After her mother died, she moved to Maine to live with her older sister, where she studied to be a teacher. During this time, her brother Converse, a Unitarian pastor at the time, was responsible for his younger sister's education and literary masters such as Homer and Milton. Frances stayed with her brother in her early 20s and met many of the leading writers and philosophers of the day through him. She became a Unitarian as well. Lydia happened to read an article in the North American Review by John G. Palfrey. Despite having never considered becoming an author, she instantly began writing the first chapter of her novel, Hoboken. It takes place in the late 1620s and early 1630s and discusses, among other things, the marriage of a recently immigrated white American woman, Mary Conant, to the eponymous Native American, and her attempts to raise their child in a white society. This was the beginning of the novelist's access to early New England history. She finished it in 6 weeks, inspired by her brother's praise, and got it published. She wrote constantly from this point till her death. Lydia taught for a year at a seminary in Medford before opening a private school in Watertown, Massachusetts in 1824. She founded the Juvenile Miscellany, the first monthly newspaper for children in the United States, in 1826, and oversaw its publishing for 8 years. Following the publication of further works in which she expressed her opposition to slavery, most of her audience turned against her, particularly in the South. The Juvenile Miscellany folded after declining book sales and subscriptions. She then married David Lee Child in 1828 and moved to Boston. Lydia Maria Child was a strong supporter of women's rights as well as Native American and slave rights. She primarily expressed these opinions in her 55-year writing career. She is most known for her anti-slavery and literary writings, among them is The Quadroons. This is the narrative of a mother and daughter who are quadroons or mulattoes. This brief story depicts what happened to mixed-race ladies in the 18th and the early 19th century. Much of what occurs to them is for political reasons or what society thought was right at the time. Rosalie and Zarepha, the mother and daughter, are portrayed as generic examples to the reader. Not every person of mixed race experienced the same experiences as these two, but I believe Child is attempting to capture her reader's attention with a general example of how unjust these rules were at the time. Much of the novel emphasizes how damaging society can be to the lives of those of mixed race. Child also emphasizes the importance of a formal marriage, stating that if given the opportunity, persons who are not legally tied in matrimony can simply stray. Rosalie lives peacefully apart from people in the story before her marriage when she was a young lady. They live happily for 10 years when she marries Edward, a white man. Their marriage is not legal, but it is accepted by heaven, according to Rosalie. But when her daughter, Zarepha, approaches the age of 9, Edward feels compelled to become more politically aware. As a result, he abandons Rosalie and Zarepha to marry the daughter of a wealthy and politically powerful man. Edward said he still loved Rosalie and he even proposed she become his mistress, but she was too pure to form a selfish league with crime. She died a year later, perhaps from heartbreak, a year after Edward married Charlotte. Zarepha grew up in a cottage away from society where she was schooled by tutors sent by Edward, who lavished her with attention. When she was 15, she fell in love with her harp teacher and intended to move to France to evade America's terrible racial system. But her ambitions were thwarted when Edward died on his way to see her one day, and she never left for France. However, Rosalie's parents did not appear to have any documents of manumission documented, so Zarifa was sold to a wealthy middle-aged man who lavished her with gifts. But she eventually goes insane and dies after her master murders her harp teacher in an attempt to rescue Zarifa. Child wants the reader to realize, while this is a fictional novel, it is based on true facts, and that this type of situation occurred all the time in the South. At first glance, Child appears to downplay the situation, but I believe she is attempting to demonstrate that people did not care about people of mixed race, so she adopts the tone of those who were unconcerned in order to emphasize her argument that others should be concerned, and she wants readers to know what happens to mulattoes and quadroons. It appears to be more of a "oh well" phrase, but the underlying meaning is, now that I have shown you, how will you respond? Child also wants people to read this narrative and think on how things could have turned out differently. She offers hints in the writing that alternate choices could have been made for a better outcome. For example, if persons of mixed race could lawfully marry, Edward might not have abandoned Rosalie, and the harp teacher could have cared for Zarifa instead of losing her by being sold into slavery. Overall, Lydia Maria Child's 1842 short story, The Quadroons, examines the issue of racial injustice and the disastrous effects of slavery and miscegenation laws in the antebellum United States. The Quadroons gives important historical context for the pre-Civil War United States. It represents the period's social, cultural, and political milieu, giving insight on the intricacies of race relations and the impact of slavery. In discussing and reading through the selected text, I believe it provides representation of marginalized voices. The plot revolves around characters that are frequently ignored or overlooked in mainstream literature. By adding the quadroons, American literature classes can help to create a more inclusive and diverse representation of voices while also addressing the perspectives of those who have been historically suppressed. Exploration of identity, of racial identity. The story delves into the issue of racial identification and the difficulties faced by people of mixed race during a time when society rigorously adhered to racial hierarchy. The hardships of the characters serve as a lens through which students can examine the development of racial identity and the implications of a society based on racial prejudice. Discussion of social injustices. The Quadroons investigates the injustices perpetrated by slavery, as well as the legal and societal constraints put on interracial unions. Incorporating this book into literary courses allows for an in-depth conversation about social injustice, systemic racism, and the long-term consequences of discriminatory policies. Lydia Maria Child, the author of Quadroons, was a well-known abolitionist and supporter of women's rights. Students can learn about the connection between literature and social activity by studying her work and advocacy. Child utilized her writing to advocate, and her perspective adds to a better knowledge of the time period. The story itself provides a wealth of material for literary interpretation and analysis. Child's narrative style, character development, and use of symbols to express her point can all be examined by students. Exploring these literary qualities helps pupils improve their critical thinking and analytical abilities. While The Quadroons is set in the 19th century, its themes are still pertinent to modern debates about race, identity, and social justice. Students can establish parallels between historical narratives and current contemporary concerns by studying this work. The inclusion of the Quadroons within this American literature courses broadens the literary canon, provides a more thorough awareness of historical and social circumstances, and stimulates critical discussions about race and inequality in America.